Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about the latest album by Eric Clapton. It's called Meanwhile, and it's his first studio album since 2018 when he released his Happy Christmas album, and it's his first sort of non-Christmas album, which, artists can put out without having to do too much heavy lifting usually. His first traditional studio album since 2016 when he released I Still Do. And a lot has changed since then. A lot has changed in the wider world, and a lot has changed in Eric Clapton's world. And it seems weird because, on the one hand, it's not very long ago. It's less than 10 years. I can't immediately think of any great new technological developments since then, except the commercialization of AI. AI was around then, but it's been commercialized, so fair enough. In 2016, people didn't know what a chat GPT was. Um, Electric cars have become more popular. Elon Musk has bought a social media network. Some people like him more because of it. Some people like him less because of it. In 2016, when his last traditional studio album, was released, Barack Obama was president. Then Donald Trump became president. Biden became president. There was a pandemic. There was a kind of recession. There were civil rights riots. There were all sorts of political and social changes that came from those events. And Eric Clapton, as someone who's always been a keen observer of world events and of social and cultural events, was clearly impacted by a lot of this, even though it might not immediately seem so obvious. Clapton's music has never been overtly political or social in its commentary, but there have always been subtle cues in his music about what he's thinking and what he's feeling, especially since the death of his son, which of course was commemorated by the hit Tears in Heaven, beautiful song, already several decades old now. Now, Clapton became he was the victim of a medical incident because he took a non um trying to figure out how to say this on YouTube, a non-recreational substance, let's call it, that resulted in his inability to play guitar. His hands and fingers were such that he couldn't actually play. And if that were permanent, his career would have ended around 4 years ago, which would have been really, really sad. But luckily, he did recover from that thing that we're not allowed to talk about. Although Clapton, in other places, has talked about it quite a lot. And rather than earning him sympathy or even empathy from the wider musical, corporate, and critical space, he earned approbation for telling his truth about what happened, which seems really weird because everyone has the right to their truth. And with musicians in particular, I want to hear what they have to say. I don't need to agree with it or disagree with it, but I want to hear the voices behind the music. Remember that show, Behind the Music? Well, now we're not allowed to peer behind the curtain of the music unless it's been pre-sanitized by the powers that be. So Eric Clapton is on the one hand a changed man because he went through this traumatic experience. He luckily came out the other end with his ability to play. But it obviously left a big impact on him. And because of the political situations surrounding that, he teamed up in the early 2020s. I guess we're still in them, but the earlier 2020s, he did a lot of collaborations with Van Morrison, who shared a similar point of view to Clapton on what was happening. And some of those songs are now collected on this album because this album was recorded over a number of years, beginning in 2020. And it wasn't recorded sort of all at once. It was recorded in fits and starts, and some of the songs we haven't heard before, some of them are new. So, for instance, Moon River with Jeff Beck, one of the final things Jeff recorded before he died. This collaboration was released before. The Rebels with Van Morrison, we've heard before. Stand and Deliver, which features Van Morrison, that's written by Van Morrison as well, we've heard before. And so this album I would call a collection of all of the things that were on Eric Clapton's mind, both musically and philosophically, and dare I say, even politically. And it's a very mellow album in terms of the musicality, even though, in terms of the psychological content, you could argue it's his most hardcore album. And in many ways, that sort of paradox has been a key moniker of Eric Clapton's evolution as a musician. He's someone who started out in his early days in the hardest of the hard settings, notably Cream. They were a really hard rock band, but even before Cream, things like the Blues Breakers and the Yardbirds, Eric always wanted to play hard. He wanted to play the blues hard. He never really was into rock and roll cliches, which is interesting because he's become known as a great rock and roll guitarist. But he always loved the blues, and with every subsequent album, he got closer and closer to playing the blues his way and to writing bluesy rock and dare I say bluesy pop songs in his way. And that's really been the whole trajectory of his career, minus the kind of mid 80s stuff that was unabashedly rock pop. When he came out with the Unplugged album in the early 90s, this was a real statement saying that he's going to do things his way. And this album is very much a product of that development. Super laid back in terms of the presentation, very easy on the ear, but with some interesting ideas that challenge the status quo. He's a true survivor of the music industry that has benefited from him at times, turned against him at other times, misunderstood him at others. But he's doing what he's doing, and much like Van Morrison, he's still got it. He's really still got it. So if you enjoy what he's still got, you are probably going to enjoy the album. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.